Okay, welcome everybody to DX Leaders episode 3 today. We have some fantastic guests and an awesome topic talking about driving B2C customer growth in the post-COVID world. And we'll hear from P&G, from Golden Gate Ventures, from Deloitte, and from Salesforce. So I don't think I've seen a more competent panel ever, wondering why I'm here, but okay, we'll figure that out later. So while everybody's just joining, Andreas, are you excited about number 3?
Oh, absolutely. It feels like, routine and just you're getting better and better every time. So I have to say, I'm very excited today.
Okay, good. So for those that have already tuned in, a quick reminder, we'll have sufficient time for your questions. So please make sure that you post your questions in the Q&A section, not the chat function, the Q&A section of Zoom. And then you can also see what other people have been asking, and you can actually upvote their questions so that we can start asking the most popular ones here. So we look really at driving B2C customer growth from different perspectives. We have the data perspective, we have the giant in the room, we have the consulting view, and we see what's happening in the startup ecosystem. Let's get started. My name is Lars Voedisch. I'm former journalist and storyteller by heart. I'm your host together with Andreas Enderlin. Hi, Andreas. And this webinar series is brought to you by SwissChem in partnership with Deloitte. And today, as I mentioned that you can see on the screen, is all about driving B2C customer growth in the post-COVID world. As you see, this year has brought so many changes on us. Not just on us, but also as the consumer. Some of us are consumers, obviously, so we've gone through that journey ourselves. So given the new norm, many companies had to explore new initiatives, new strategies, and making digital transformation more important than ever. So we'll look at a few questions. How have businesses managed to adjust to that sudden shift? What strategies have they implemented? What worked, what didn't work? And what value do we currently create actually for customers, and how can we create more value? Okay, so last reminder, Q&A, please put your questions up there and we'll try to answer as many as possible. But now over to Andreas, the chair of the Digital Transformation Awards, founder and managing partner of Hugo Capital Partners. He'll tell you a little bit more about the DX Leaders series and the awards. Andreas, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. We are very happy to have you all today, also on behalf of the SwissChem and Deloitte. And I just want to give you a quick run through on what we want to achieve with this Digital Transformation Award. So maybe one further, Clarissa, if you would be so kind. Okay, so what is this about? We started this initiative actually beginning of this year, and with two main objectives. It was really about recognizing efforts in digitalization, in digital transformation in companies in the ASEAN region. So, we're all very busy working sometimes in our silos, in our organizations, and we maybe don't have the platform to also recognize these efforts. So this is what was the original goal. The second goal was really also to provide a platform like today to have this best practice exchange possibility, to bring people from different companies, from different backgrounds to discuss specific topics. And we really hope that you will gain some insights of today's discussion. This award is basically made up of 7 subcategories. So we have advanced manufacturing, we have B2C also. So this topic and category we will also have during the Digital Transformation Award, and some other that you can see here on the list. Who is eligible? So it's all the companies. Again, it's not a SwissChem initiative. It's really very well anchored, as you can see on the right-hand side, within the ecosystem. And we are very proud and happy that we have so strong support from the Eurocham, from the AHK, Außenhandelskammer, as we say in German. So that's the German chamber, if you're asking yourself what it means. Then we have Enterprise Singapore, we have SG Innovate. Very glad to have them on board also, to really also underline the importance of digital transformation from a Singaporean governmental perspectives. Now, some of you might ask, okay, nice, but what is, how is this going to be evaluated? What are the assessment criteria? So we have been working with Deloitte very intensively on defining a maturity model to really frame that assessment. And we will talk at some later sessions about that more in details. And we will have a jury that will assess these different applications. So highly decorated jury of senior leaders in the region to basically assess your application. And what is also important is the public. So we will open all the voting to the public, so everybody can vote which application is preferred. So maybe if we can go one further, Larissa. So quick view on the timeline. We're almost end of September. So for those who haven't applied yet, this is one of the last calls to apply. So please do so. I think you will get some very nice benefits out of that. So one thing, again, to wrap it up, is the recognition, is this best practice exchange and accessing new networks, as we might also experience today. And there are also prizes waiting for you. So please, if your teams have been working on initiatives, don't be shy, hand in your application. You will not be disappointed. And then obviously in a very Swiss way of things, we will have a verifiable digital certificate for you so that nobody can fake your winning certificate. And obviously that's part of our own digital transformation that we have been going through. So we really hope that this is something that will benefit you. If we look at further into October and November, so we will have 2 pitching sessions where you can basically showcase as an applicant what you have done. We will have the public there, we will have the jury, and it's going to be quite some fun, I can tell you. We are now working out the storyboard, and we will try to make it as interactive as possible. This is basically it, but before I close, obviously the 2 most important ladies, Clarissa and Andrea, if you have any questions, please reach out to them. If you don't want to apply, you can still have a chat with them. They're really fun, and you can talk about digital transformation with them. So please get in touch with them, and we are happy to receive your application. With that, back to you, Lars.
Thank you. And let's dive into the topic digital transformation with today's poll. And today's poll is, has COVID truly been an accelerator in terms of B2C digitalization? So if Clarissa could launch the poll, has COVID been an accelerator in terms of B2C digitalization? Yes, it's key to survival, or no, my business industry can ride out the storm. So let's give you about 30 seconds. It's not that difficult. It's yes or no. Has it made things faster? Has it sped up? Is it an accelerator? Yes or no. So we hasn't been able to answer that question. Should listen very carefully, because that's what today's episode is actually about. So let's close the poll and have a quick look at the results, and then it's right over to Keerti in a second. Yeah, absolutely key to survival, 95%. Good. The 5% saying no, maybe you should tune in next year again when you're still alive. No, it's it depends also. If you've already been on the journey, most likely you are ahead of the curve, and we can all learn from you. Good. So let's switch off the slideshow, and or rather, let's move it over to Keerti from Deloitte Digital, and he'll start with an introduction on today's topic to provide a little bit of a framework. So, Keerti Chivukula, please take it away.
Thanks, Lars, and thanks, Andreas, for the intro. We thought before we got into the panel, we take a few minutes and maybe just set the context around what are we really seeing in the B2C space, and would love to see our panelists kind of opine on it a bit more from their own personal experiences. So maybe if you just go to the next slide. I think from a COVID perspective, right, whether it's the new normal or just an accelerated normal, a lot of these shifts have been happening, particularly in Asia, I would say over the last 3-4 years. But now we find ourselves with them quite accelerated here just in the last 6 months. And just to look at a few of these, right? So if we look at purchase evaluation, for example, we used to be a very price conscious kind of consumer. Now we're actually looking at a lot of things around health and safety and origin consciousness. So as a brand, how do you deal with that? Maybe Sanjay's got some interesting stories there. If we look at asset ownership, right? We've heard sharing economy nonstop for how many years now, but a lot of that really we're seeing it take a step back, right? More than half of the users of a sharing economy are using less, and they said they'll use even less. So a lot of these trends, again, travel and transport to a more of a flexible work, flexible home-based, and of course the last one is probably one that we live every day in Asia, right? The shift from a globalized economy to more of a regional and local economy, right? And so these shifts really accelerated by COVID. And if we just go to the next slide, from a consumer perspective, there was always this gap between consumer expectations and particularly how, consumer goods, retail companies have addressed it. Now that gap has just gotten wider, right? So if we look at simple things like a vast majority of consumers expect direct interaction from brands, direct engagements. They expect new products more frequently. But if you look at the flip side of it, we hear companies saying that they don't have adequate consumer data, right, to be able to understand their consumers and do more direct interaction and engagement. And if they don't have data, they don't really have insights into what new products do they want to launch and for who. Similarly, most consumers now want to buy products directly, and they will exchange personal data if it's for relevancy, right? But again, companies are finding themselves ill-equipped to kind of handle this. And then if we go to the next slide, we've always known the benefits of consumer engagement, right? This is not new. I've been in Singapore for 6+ years, and we've been talking about B2C transformation since I've landed here, right? And we know that from a consumer engagement perspective, there's both outside in and inside out benefits. So yes, we can look at things like effectiveness of marketing. So maximizing your ROI, right? If I know who to target and where to target, then theoretically I spend less money to target those people, or I can make my money go farther, right? So there's an operational efficiency perspective, kind of goes hand in hand with lower acquisition costs. So, again, one of the advantages of looking at digital channels is that we can lower our cost per acquisition, in some cases up to 30%. But there's also, those intangible benefits, right? Driving loyalty, driving sort of that brand awareness and brand preference, as well as tangible in terms of lifetime value. So not just getting a new customer, but getting that customer to be with us over and over again. So we know these benefits. So how do we contrast it, right? The shifts are accelerating because of COVID. The gap between consumers and businesses getting bigger. All of the companies know they need to do better. So what are we seeing? And if we go to the last slide, really seeing sort of 5 different ways that different companies are reacting to this new normal. First one is really around customer experience, right? So understanding who this new customer is. What is that new way that they want to engage? And that goes into the second pillar around rapid e-commerce. So how do we quickly deploy either B2C or direct to customer kind of channels over e-commerce and put our products out there, right? I mean, if you look at retail, a lot of retailers couldn't do business in their physical space. So now how do we do business in the digital space? Well, that goes into the third one where it requires, you know, a scaling of a digital infrastructure. A lot of companies in Asia have been looking at digital as a hobby over the last 5 years. You know, I'll dabble in this, I'll try this, I'll try that. But now, you know, if you have 500-600% growth in those channels, then how do we scale our digital infrastructure? How do we shift marketing mix, right? You know, 90% of marketing budgets in Asia used to be TV, out of home, or events driven marketing. A lot of that, you know, certainly out of home and events driven is not really relevant anymore, right? So how do we shift that marketing mix to more digital? And then finally, you know, digital requires a new way of working. So how do we restructure our organization, right? As a consumer, we don't really care if it's the sales function or the service function or the marketing function or the product function. We just care about the brand. So how do we, you know, how do brands kind of react to that? So hopefully just a glimpse of what we're seeing kind of brands doing. Love to maybe get into the panel and hear from our panelists about what they're seeing. Lars, back to you.
Thanks, Keerti. So I think that was a very comprehensive overview. And now let's hear it directly from the people on the battleground, right? Maybe let's start with Sanjay. Sanjay Singh is a CIO and VP, GBS, Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. So basically, about 2/3 of the world for P&G. So what are some of the key changes and challenges in B2C that you are seeing that helps companies to connect, engage, and ultimately grow their consumer business?
So Lars, and thank you. And this is Sanjay. I think what Keerti mentioned is perfectly bang on. But I would start this with something that I always believed in, and it got shattered on day one of, call it COVID. And it was that I believed always in Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, that it takes time, right? And he was right, that it is not always the strongest, not always the smartest, but the one that is adaptive to change wins ultimately. Except instead of an evolution, it became an overnight transformation. And we suddenly woke up in a world that you have to evolve, and every one of us have to evolve overnight. But that fundamental concept remained, which is adaptive to change. And that struck. And what Keerti mentioned, it took us in P&G in all the directions he has mentioned. One direction I would add to this, what Keerti didn't mention, was manufacturing. Those companies who don't sell digital products, there is a whole world of backwards manufacturing and ability to supply. And that itself took a way to transform it with the new laws in operation, not ability for people to move. But one of the first things that was important, and I'm sure everyone did, was taking care of safety of people. That came as the number one need. And the second need was overnight that ability to operate digitally. I have seen many of my friends in the companies who said they had to retrain because they were not geared for that. Luckily for P&G, our way of working virtually was very much entrenched. And I think the way people took that overnight, and we had to upstream 10x the infrastructure because overnight. And since it was all on the cloud, we were able to do that, which is basically get all the operation from manufacturing to raw material to media in the front end, to DTCs, to selling, all of that up digitally without people meeting each other. So absolutely true that all the different angles became digital. And equally what was very important was the changing consumer needs and behaviors and insights at a rapid speed. I mean, if we have seen the curve of the countries from people being worried, not knowing what this is about, to coming to some form of a shape that my needs are something else. So the behaviors were changing, some of which will last for a long time, some of which are temporary in nature. And the last thing I would say is what became important to all our brands. And like you said, in my region, we have 105 countries and about 16 different categories. Each one can be a company by itself, and hence the insights and the approach are different. But what became very important is the level of trust, a trust on the brand. Because can this brand serve the quality to what I need? Can this brand give me what I need? But I need it now. And that became equally an important element of the digital. So that's the broader framework in which we had to change overnight in P&G.
Fantastic. So I would compare it a little bit like with Lou Gerstner's task at IBM back then. So you made elephants dance. So maybe let's move it over from the elephants, the giants in the room, to the other side of the innovation spectrum, the startup space. So maybe, Michael, you're with Golden Gate Ventures, right? And you're really with the innovation forefront, who can move fast, but also maybe don't have that infrastructure that supports them through a crisis like that. So from your perspective, from the innovation startup ecosystem side, what have you seen driving B2C growth in this middle of and soon hopefully post-COVID era?
Yeah, there's a few things I would like to comment on, and I like Sanjay's comment on kind of the old manufacturing side, because we tend to forget when we talk about innovation that it's all around startups and young kids, building very cool businesses. But yeah, we don't have to forget that 80% of our entire business ecosystem is still very traditional, and they can't just switch overnight. One of the interesting things that we have seen is, I would say one is on the consumer side. So assuming that you are a startup and you are innovating and you are building a new business, we sometimes tend to forget that we also have to educate the entire consumer, because from a business standpoint, things have changed really fast because of COVID. But imagine what it means for the consumer. For instance, me as a parent, I had to do homeschooling from one day to the other. And for everyone that has kids, I think we've all either gained a lot of weight or became alcoholics just because of it. So educating your consumer on using digital and what it means in your home, what it means mentally is very important. Then healthcare is a very interesting one. So assuming that there's a lot of healthcare tech available, but we've also realized that in a lot of areas, for instance, in Indonesia or areas in the Philippines, where you don't have bandwidth or a hyper new telephone, it makes it very difficult to access these services. So when people are in lockdown during COVID, how do you make sure that there is access to healthcare? How do you make sure that there is access to kind of digital services? So, it wasn't only on the innovation side. We really had to look towards what is happening on the consumer side and what kind of education should be available, what kind of tools should we make available. And that was a big learning journey for ourselves as investors, but also for a lot of our portfolio companies.
Very, very good point. Then maybe to round it up, let's move over to Chris Jordan. He's the regional head of data, personalization, and marketing intelligence, ASEAN at Salesforce. So the man with the data. What story or what stories do the numbers tell us how this consumer B2C growth or transformation is working out?
Yeah, I think it's been a very, very interesting time, as everyone just touched on, right? In this kind of huge acceleration into this kind of e-commerce world, digital world, data world. And I think, the way that we've seen it from most of our big B2C customers, right, is there's actually been a data boom, is how I like to think about it, right? Because all of a sudden, everyone's doing everything digitally. Everyone's doing everything online. People that never opened emails are opening emails because they're at home and there's nothing else to do, right? So suddenly engagement has actually gone through the roof. So I think what we've seen a boom in kind of data, a boom in sort of consumer engagement, but at the same time, I guess we've also seen a big problem, right? Where there are a lot of organizations out there that weren't ready for that data boom per se, and are kind of therefore got disparate systems, capturing data all over the place, and aren't really doing something that I think Sanjay touched on, which is kind of basing what they're doing with data on trust. So we've kind of got a whole bunch of the different things that we're seeing happening in that world around consumer engagement, how that data is being collected, and then this kind of underpinning pillar, I think, which is a bit of a challenge, around trust. And I think if you look at what's happening in the consumer market and people like Apple and Google announcing things during the same period, right, where, you know, IDFA, you know, we're not going to allow you to collect data, and Google changing cookies and all these things changing all at the same time as there's this kind of online explosion. I think we're seeing kind of polar opposites at one end of the spectrum, and then, you know, brilliance at the other. So we're kind of seeing customers that struggle with how they then use that consumer data and the expectation those consumers have on them. And then on the flip side, some of those doing really well and actually killing it and kind of loving life because they're capturing all this brilliant data, you know, the bigger organizations that are prepared for it and ready for it, and then harnessing that data in the right way. So we're kind of seeing two big pillars, and then a whole bunch of companies that I think are very quickly trying to accelerate the middle, right, and get from the bottom to the top. So I'd say that's where we're at a broad level.
Fantastic. That's already kind of quite a canvas we opened here. Andreas, you'll be challenged to narrow it down and drill a bit deeper here.
Yeah. Yes. So I wanted to actually move back to the elephant in the room, you know, to Sanjay, and just on P&G. But before I do that, I need to reply to Michael and say, I don't have kids, and I didn't gain weight, and I didn't become an alcoholic. But so maybe to you, Sanjay, on P&G. I mean, obviously, as men, you know, we all think about Gillette, right? So Gillette was bought for 57 billion in 2005. And last year, they had a massive 8 billion write-off because of different issues like currency, competition, and obviously we do less shaving. I'm an example. And on top of that, you know, you have a massive retail power in your channel, right? That is preventing you maybe to go directly to the customer or to the consumer. So how has P&G coped with these, you know, changes, and also with COVID? You know, has it accelerated digital kind of sales of Gillette? And if it has, is it like cannibalizing your retail business?
So Andreas, it's a great question, and I'll start that by saying, touch wood, as everyone has seen, that the P&G results has been pretty good globally, equally in our region as well. Now, I will dwell this into a couple of areas, very specific. One of the beautiful things that we have is the ability of different categories. And you are right, that different times, it's not just COVID, but has its own cycles. But our categories and many stools, many legs of the stools allows us to have faster growing ones, and equally some those that may slow down. And that is true, very true, based on the consumer behavior. Equally in the health and the hygiene space, where we have a lot, from Pampers to Whisper or Always for the women, as well as if we go into the Vicks and the Neurobiomes and all the medicines as well, which very few people know that we equally have on the drug space. Now, what becomes very important is the insight for each of the brand, and that is unique. And how do you reach the consumer? First, you will understand the need. So one of the first things we did once we had everything settled, which was pretty quick and taking care of the people, is the consumer insights. And examples such as virtual consumer studies we launched, where we could do for any of the markets, so that we are in, we have the best understanding of what is the understanding of the consumer today and what do we tweak. That became paramount important. And accordingly, one of the things going for us is because of the quality aspect that we put in our products and years of R&D and research and quality raw material, that became as an advantage for us in all the categories in communicating to the consumer. And the important piece was reach. And in that, to the second question that you asked about retail, we have been on this journey of ultimately for P&G, it's about serving the consumer needs that she or he wants any day. And we are at the service for them. And which meant that wherever she wants to shop, we ought to be there. So we have multitude of channels. from physical retail to D2C for our brands, from e-commerce. And you are right about the shifting balances as consumers started to use D2C more effectively and equally e-commerce. And within e-commerce, new business models we started to see very rapidly. An example is Grab delivery. It just came up, and then ability for them to compete with the e-commerce players and say, I can make it reach to the consumer home where she or he is. So essentially, we had the advantage of that. And because of our digital stack on which we had been working on for a couple of years, we were ahead of the game. And we were able to do this in an agile way. I think that's what made a difference between possibly what some companies may have seen, that we know what to do, but can we do it fast enough? And we were able to pivot from consumer understanding to making it operational, selling via the multiple channels, and including delivery, which was never easy, depending upon when is it locked down, not locked down. And continuing manufacturing was more challenging, to be very transparent, because depending upon the laws of the country, etc., when to shut down, how to open the plant up again, how to procure raw material. But as we were able to do that, we were able to take, I would say, advantage just because we were able to meet the consumer needs that she wanted from us every day.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. Then just a reminder for our audience to add their questions in the Q&A section. I see the first ones coming in already. That's fantastic. So maybe let's move over to a little bit on strategy part. And of course, it's all related. What does the accelerating shift towards digital really mean for customer engagement? Let's focus down on customer engagement. You know, very different if you still had your old kind of, I don't know, coffee stamp card, and suddenly you maybe even get a coffee delivered to them, but it's a very different model, right? And everybody's competing for that very limited, though growing screen time. Maybe Chris, maybe you can share some insights or data points that you've come across and say, hey, how can you really cut through it? Because just doing more, if everybody's just doing more at the same piece of the cake, it's just smaller pieces.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think it's a very broad spectrum of a topic, right? In terms of, as we move to that kind of digital world where people are trying to capture that and kind of understand it, I think there's a couple of things that have happened. I think you mentioned a lot around kind of customer expectation. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've seen is that as we've moved to this world, there's definitely this heightened customer expectation, right? That they used to go in, I used to go to the coffee shop, right? They knew my order. They knew who I was. They'd see me coming and they'd get it ready. Right? Suddenly I move digitally, it might be the same provider. And if they're not providing that service, my expectation drops, right? So I've suddenly gone from a, you know, white glove experience per se to a digital experience, and I'm not matching that around that personalization and that understanding of who I am. So I think that's one big challenge we've seen around kind of consumers that have moved to that digital world, but then not, you know, with brands that aren't ready for that level of personalization that they expect. I think the other thing we've seen is that, and I kind of touched on this before, is that we're actually running a bi-weekly study using one of our tools, Tableau, to kind of do a quick touch on how consumers are feeling and what they're expecting. We've got an ASEAN focused version. And one of the recent questions was, how willing are you to receive offers from brands at the moment, right? Because we're in a bit of a sensitive area where we're kind of balancing what I think is needed, which is empathetic marketing. But what we're getting quite often is sympathetic marketing, which I don't know if anyone's seen that video that was going around with all of the ads from the US that all were kind of, you know, we're here for you, we feel your pain. And they're all pretty much the same script, right? And so, you know, that's sympathy, right? But empathy is understanding what someone's actually going through and then offering something in a value exchange. And I think where we're seeing success is brands that are doing that, right? They're jumping on it and going, hey, we know things are tough at the moment, so here's some loyalty points. Here's bonuses. You know, travel companies, for example, some of them are doing brilliant things around points as my platinum status disappears on a weekly basis, right? Because I'm not traveling. So how are these brands adapting and being agile in a quick way that allows them to kind of give that value exchange, I think is where we're seeing success. But again, I also think there's a lot of people doing this really badly. And so I'll probably be a bit more controversial in that. I think that what we've seen as a sort of technology vendor, right, is people kind of panic when they're not ready and they go, oh, we need technology. And quite often they buy technology, but they buy it without a process or a strategy behind it, or even the right people behind it. And actually, you know, we've seen that quite often, and we're actually pausing and saying to people, well, before you kind of do this, yes, we know you need to accelerate this transformation, but you still can't just jump into it without a plan, without a process, without people in place. And actually technology should come last, right? It should be very much about what are we trying to do? How does that serve the customer? So what's our strategy around the customer? As a result, what data do we need and how do we collect that, measure it, and do it in a trustworthy way? Now, what technology do we need to be able to enable all those processes? And often we're seeing it reversed, which is the problem we're seeing.
So Chris, you were saying before as Salesforce, you know, you're working with the big brands out there, right? So I think coming back to what Michael was touching on is if you look at ASEAN, you know, it's 90% even more of SMEs that are not in a very digital mature state, right? So do you have a view on all these SMEs out there? I mean, are they ready in terms of, you know, data integrity, in terms of do they have the data pool, or is it all, you know, distributed over all their different locations? Because, you know, by my experience, I think this is just a very practical first step that you have to go through. Otherwise you cannot act on your data. And so I've been working, you know, in MNCs where you would think from the outside that you would have the data ready, but we didn't, so we couldn't act. So how's the state on all these SMEs that are maybe listening in today?
Yeah, I think there's still an education job to be done, right? In terms of, again, you've got some that are brilliantly set up from the top down with data at the heart of what they're doing, and consent-based data, which I think is critical, right? I think there's a big difference between data being at the heart and consent-based or trust-based data being at the heart of what you do. So I think the ones that have done that from the start, great. Then there's others that are trying to scrambling for data, right? Where it might be they're buying data, or, you know, it's a bit of a black box. That starts to become a bit of a gray area, which is not something that we kind of are recommending. But I think that really when it comes down to the kind of smaller, medium businesses and enterprises that are growing in the space, it's all around having, again, as I say, a strategy in place around how to start, right? Because as I say, a lot of the customers we're talking to that might be B2C, but also might have a gap along that B2C path, right? So they might be, you know, direct to consumer, but they might be B2B2C, etc., right? How do they start to get to that end consumer? And kind of collecting things like first party data in a trustworthy way. And when I say first party data, obviously there's multiple parts of first party data, but I'm thinking PII, so personal identifiable information. At any opportunity, when you're talking to consumers, you should be capturing, where possible, an email address or a phone number, depending which country you're in, and having that opportunity to engage with those users, A, in a cost efficient way, but B, in a way where they've subscribed. I have to say, one of the worst things that a few of the SMEs did during lockdown, and as something that I noticed, I don't know about everybody else in terms of on the call and the panelists, was I got about 1,000 emails from companies that I don't remember signing up for, saying, you know, we're here for you. We know it's a tough time. Just so you know, this is our plan. And I'm thinking, when did I sign up for that? And so I think when I say about kind of having a relevant engagement based on trust-based data, it's about doing it when you know that I've engaged with you. And that's where we talk often about this concept of the value exchange, right? Where I'm happy to sign up to you, no matter how big your company is. I'm happy to sign up for your newsletter if I get value in exchange, right? I get something back. So you give me an offer, or I've got some sort of way that I'm going to get benefit from you. And I think that's what we are trying to drive these guys towards. So collecting first party data where possible, building it yourself. Because also, if you think about it at a competitive level, if you're buying data, you can guarantee your competitors in that space are buying the same data. It doesn't differentiate you. So any opportunity to capture, build up that first party data pool that has consent underpinning it, and then use that to drive that value exchange and relevancy.
Thanks, Chris. Let's look at it from a slightly different perspective. A lot of things that you described need a lot of brain power, the right partner, and time. So, Keerti, maybe over to you, to the consulting side. You know, in a crisis that hits kind of overnight, how do you deal with customers, and what do you advise them that they don't necessarily have the time to, you know, to test, to plan, to optimize, and they're ready in a year when the industry might not even exist anymore?
Well, I think, was that old saying, there's an app for that? That's what I tell my customers. I think you're right in that, you know, and again, if we go back a few years, right, I think one of the biggest barriers that we used to see for B2C transformation was just the effort that it would take to go through it, right? I think all the things that Chris mentioned, requires, the ability for you to capture data, not only on your own channels, but third-party channels and affiliate channels, and bring it in and create that experience. I guess a couple of trends, in our new post-COVID world, one of the things I mentioned earlier was this concept of rapid e-commerce. So we're certainly seeing a lot of companies say, look, I get that I need, maybe a holistic solution that connects front office to back office and all of that. But right now I'm drowning and I need to do something to start to claw back lost opportunity, or maybe to test new opportunity, right? A couple of examples is we're seeing traditionally B2B companies, for example, now go dabble in direct to consumer, right? Because it's a new opportunity. So agility, speed to market, test and fail. I think those are all things that we are seeing. Even organizations that were, let's say, very reluctant in doing that maybe a year ago, now are a lot more open to doing that, because doing something is better than doing nothing in this market.
Thanks, Keerti. Let's just have one more perspective, Andreas, and then it's
I just feel like, we are, it's pretty much the same discussion we had like 8 months ago, no? I'm just wondering, what is really, because we always say it has accelerated, COVID has accelerated. So I'm wondering, and that's really an open question into the group. If you look into the future, like 5 years, which investments would you have to make let's take again the SME, the normal SME, not the big P&G. Which investments you have to make in order to really be relevant in 5 years' time? And even maybe 5 years is too long out. But if you had to give this SME a response, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. I think for me, it would be your biggest investment you can make now is in talent and finding the right people that will last you for the next 5 years. One of the things we've noticed is, kind of with technology all around us, with, us and even SMEs having the ability to, plug into open source systems, plug into, existing tech architecture. They don't have to think of everything on their own. The 6 of us can open up a Shopify store tomorrow and be in business. So effectively, there's a lot of tools available for you to at least, set up and start. The one thing that is not abundant is tech talent. And with tech talent, I also mean organizational talent. And I think to our previous speakers, all of them mentioned, the customer, you can have data, but you need to be able to listen to your customer and understand your customer and understand the needs of your customer. And to Chris's example, getting these random newsletters, that's from the 1980s. You can't get away with that anymore. So you really kind of need to, appeal to your individual customer. And I always tell entrepreneurs, one of the stickiest industries is the gaming industry. If there's anything we can learn in terms of how do I ensure that I have an engaging customer, please have a look at the gaming industry and how they're able to, get these kids and even old guys like me, kind of stuck into these games. But for me, any investment you can make now is in getting the right talent.
And and that stickiness, that's interesting, right? If you look at Razer, and if your fans and clients and your loyal customers want a toaster, let's do a toaster.
Maybe Sanjay, you wanna tell us?
I couldn't agree more with Michael, and I'll give a one-line story on this, on talents, and this is when Advantage came to us, and even SMAs ought to follow, which is P&G is one of the rare companies where people still say that you hire from within and grow your own talents and leadership. It came to a massive advantage because the trust with each other was so high. Even if we are all virtual, we work with each other. An example was across our region, very fast, our engineering resources developed a way to produce masks out of diaper lines. And this was important because we have thousands of our key employees and colleagues working in the plant, and they are leaving their family behind because, with social distancing and all that, you can't be going to the factory and coming back home and giving a risk to the family. So they would stay near the factories. But then it equally meant, how do we not put pressure on the governments in the early days when masks were not in supply, if you all remember that. So we had to invent it, how to produce it ourselves for ourselves, and if we have extras, give it to the community. And it happened because of people, but it's just a simple example why talents matter in the new world even more. And if I may say to SMEs, invest in your core architect. People may feel all rest, whether it is a data architect or whether it is a enterprise ecosystem architect. It is going to be a game changer if we have not used this current opportunity to do that.
But obviously, and that would be the question to Chris. Obviously, nobody wants to go to this normal SME somewhere, outside in the middle of nowhere. So, what do you do as an SME? What is the sales pitch to tech talent? How can you attract the right tech talent? Chris?
I think that's a really good point. I actually think it's a big challenge, right? In terms of there's a problem in that we've got this accelerated digital growth and tech kind of world and data world, and we don't have enough people to resource it. By the way, in most companies, like, as Sanjay just said, P&G has got the ability to hire those people. Big tech companies have got the ability to hire those people. Deloitte has the ability, right? But the reality is that even with all of that tech talent, there still isn't enough to go around, right? And so honestly, this is where, I spent, I've been at Salesforce for up to 5 years, coming up to 5 years now. And prior to that was in agency world for, over a decade across a couple of countries. And now I look at it and I see that there is a massive opportunity and gap for kind of almost contract style tech talent, right? In terms of bringing people in, like Sanjay said, might not be able to hire or afford that person full time, but bring them in to at least set things up at a base rate and kind of do it that way. And I think the way that we look at it, is we're trying to make technology as accessible as possible and kind of move to this concept of, clicks, not code, in how you set things up and make things a bit more self-fulfilling and easier. But the other thing we do at Salesforce is, and we've got a big focus, and actually saw a huge spike in during kind of the core lockdown of COVID, as it were, was something called Trailhead, which is our kind of enablement platform, which is a free online training platform to learn, for example, how to use Salesforce CRM or Salesforce Marketing Cloud and those sorts of tools. And so I think I look at it in two ways. One is, yes, you've got a gap in talent, but if you've got the right people with an agile and a growth mindset, give them the tools to allow them to grow. Because not only is it going to allow them to grow in the role they're in, and you can kind of grow your business with those, but it's also going to future-proof those people, right? There's a huge kind of growth economy in tech talent and an opportunity to do so. So I think those that are in that kind of space where they don't have the funds necessarily to do it, look at either kind of contracting or upskilling. And there are lots of tools out there that allow for that upskilling that do not cost a thing, right? Yeah. It's just time. And I get that time is a big challenge right now, but if you can contribute the time to it, there is an opportunity to kind of go out and learn it. I mean, I'll put my first hand up, right? I didn't know the thing about, how cookies worked in data 10 years ago when I was in agency, right? That's the last thing I wanted. I wanted to make some big brand TV ads. It was great fun. And so that kind of, pivot, everyone has to learn it at some point. So, and I'm sure some of the people on the call didn't know that when they started in the work environment, right? So if you can educate yourself, you almost have to flip that mindset and go, just because we don't have that talent, we've actually got some brilliant people. We just need to put them in the right course and give them the time to learn.
But is there enough, and maybe that's a question to Michael and to Keerti, is there enough collaboration between maybe also startups, because they have the tech talent, and these SMEs? Is there enough connection to these companies?
So this is where it gets difficult for startups specifically. As to earlier points, people are fighting for talent. So if you for example, you just raised a massive round, you're happy because you can hire, the CTO that you finally wanted to hire. And once you have that person in your company, the last thing you think about is, collaborating with someone else. So it's a very, very competitive and in a sense, difficult field. What does make me happy in a sense is that we're seeing more and more corporations, those are mid-sized and larger corporations, doing collaborations with startups. And whether it's around doing a POC or whether it's around something on a specific customer, we're seeing it more and more. I've seen it on the quantum computing space. I've seen it in healthcare. I've seen it on education. So at least what I see there is that on the SME side, they're not necessarily hiring this talent, but they're then working with startups to at least get access to that talent pool.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's move over to the Q&A section. We have some fantastic questions from the audience. The first one from Marco Preisig. Interesting remark on digital education access and internet bandwidth. I think we were talking about it at the very beginning today. And he says, do we actually need 2 or more different strategies for developed and emerging markets? Because well, in our kind of, for example, if you're in the Singapore Ivory Tower, very easy to think about 5G. I think Chris was relating to that, right? But what if, our markets reach from Cambodia to parts of Bangladesh? Some you have great infrastructure, others your brilliant digital transformation strategy. Will it actually work? What's your advice and view on that, Keerti? Sorry to call you out there, but
no, I mean, I think from an education perspective, I mean, there are some tremendous opportunities in the quote unquote emerging markets, right? I think if you look at Asia, we're digitally native, sort of very internet kind of enabled markets here, and that creates opportunities for us to develop and deliver education in a bite-sized consumable format that may not work, say, in the US or Europe, right? So yes, I think while we look at things like 5G, but God knows where 5G is, right? I think if you look at the current infrastructure in Asia, we're definitely seeing sort of a lot of demand in places like Indonesia and Vietnam for upskilling yourselves through digital tools and technology.
Okay, cool, thank you. Let's jump to the next question, and maybe Sanjay can answer that. What are your views on hyper-personalization for consumer products? And do you use the growth in the connected products capturing data on user behavior and consumption? Hyper-personalization for consumer products, and what role do have data, does data or connected products specifically have to play in that? Is it a big thing for P&G?
It is, and I do believe at the end of the day, each human, and we are also, I myself, when I look at it, I say, understand me, right? And I am different, and I am who I am. And technology is allowing step by step to get to understanding the person as a person, right? Versus as a group. And the group sizes on which you are understanding is shrinking. So absolutely true. Some of the new products we demonstrated and launched equally in the CES show last year, and equally what we have just launched, for example, a toothbrush on Oral-B that really reads you and then guides you on a personal basis. So I do believe, again, this will be different, but from product to product segment, but I do believe technology will unleash itself in the next 5 to 10 years on hyper-personalization. It's not just about buying it, but it is the brand or the product that I use understanding me. And if I want to refill it, then I can when I want. And it will even go to the level where the product formulations itself starts to have differentiation that affects me.
Thank you.
I would just jump in there, sorry Lars, just to add one point to that, which I think is crucial. We quite often talk to customers about hyper-personalization and kind of the balance, because I kind of call it the creepy versus relevant scale, right? In terms of, using that to be relevant to that consumer, but you also can't come across, and you hear all these horror stories, right, of consumers being sold things that they don't need or they didn't realize they already needed, right? So when I think about that hyper-personalization, absolutely, as Sanjay said, right, there's an opportunity, and if the consumers put their hand up to be personalized to at that hyper way, then great. But if they haven't, then you need to be really careful that you don't go down the creepy scale and start to target people with things where they kind of, you hear people say it all the time. Is Alexa listening to me? What's going on in my house? I got targeted with an ad when I was just talking about something 20 minutes ago, So I think there's a balance in that hyper-personalization with kind of consent and relevance.
And maybe if I can add a question, which I think Michael raised, during the preparation. So in this hyper-personalization world, and in ASEAN, where you have a lot of diversity and heterogeneous, customer requirements and so on, different countries, how do you build a brand, a really strong consumer brand that addresses that?
I'm happy to start with that. I would say that it really, in terms of building from, being in the brand side of things before joining Salesforce, I'd say that, now what we're seeing with consumers that are trying to build that brand, the only real difference is channel. Because when you think about it, you still have to have a brand, and Sanjay can probably talk to this way more than I can, but you need to have a big brand, needs to have a tone of voice that it sticks to, needs to be relevant to what it's doing, and it needs to own that in its own way. I often talk about the idea that, there's still one of the key words that I haven't heard on this call, which I think is critical, even around that talent piece, is creativity, right? We go down the road of data, but actually there's still a big focus on brand, on creativity, and kind of owning that space. And, the way that I think about it is data is your opportunity as a salesperson to get to my front door. Now, creativity is your opportunity to tell me something interesting so I don't close the door. And I think that's the way that we need to think about it, because you still need to build the brand in a way that's relevant, has a personality, cuts through the rest of that noise. Otherwise, you're going to lose me.
Yeah. And Michael, maybe if you want to add something on that, coming more from a startup, because having maybe a different playbook.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say in terms of, making sure that your product is ready for the customer now and also ready for the customer of the future. What to me is most appealing is that if I compare products X to product Y, the differences are very small, and the differences are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Sounding like a broken record, but it is a lot around, are you able to, if your product is of a certain quality, are you able to engage the consumer and make sure that you listen? A few examples that I've seen in the gaming world, which to me were pretty amazing. So for ones that are big Formula 1 fans, the Formula 1 season starts later because of COVID, and one of the car brands, Mercedes, changed their car livery to black. What one of the game developers did immediately after they launched their game, they still had the old Mercedes livery from last year. They changed it to the black one within a month, and all the fans loved it. And to me, that is around real consumer engagement, because you understand that something is happening real time, and you act on it as a brand. To me, that's how you build a brand for the future.
Very interesting.
There's so many great insights and sound bites. I tried together with the team to grab some. Unfortunately, we already have to wrap up. So sorry to all the people that posted questions. We were not able to address them because not all of them can be answered in 20 seconds. I think we have some fantastic insights here. Like what Chris just said, the real difference of building a successful brand today is creativity. The brands need to have its personality. How are you going to do that with data? Or he also said, data is the opportunity to get to my front door, and creativity helps you to close it, no, to keep you there and close it, right? That's the digital mousetrap kind of analogies. Thanks, Chris. We had Sanjay who talked about that we really taking care of consumers means taking care of consumer insights and making good use of it, right? Because consumers actually tell us what they want. Do we listen? Michael was actually interesting. We had a whole debate about talent. And one thing that Michael said, one of the biggest challenges or opportunities for especially startups right now is find the right talent, because you might not have that opportunity anymore any soon. I know how it was in the startup space last year. And he also was very interesting, gave an interesting answer on the topic SMEs and startups. It's critical that they work together, but it's extremely difficult to bring them together. And from Keerti, we've seen that you shared that there's extremely high, strong interest, especially from emerging markets, for people to upskill themselves through online, through available tools. And I think that's one of the beauties that we see in this time and age, that there's more opportunities, there are more opportunities, there are more resources available than ever before to make that jump and upgrade yourselves. So I think that's already concluding today's episode number 3 of DX Leaders. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Sanjay. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Keerti. Of course, Andreas will tell me later what we've done brilliantly and how we can improve better next time. Talking about next time, we'll be back in exactly 1 week with our focus shifting to the second B. It's B2B e-commerce riding the perfect storm with DKSH and as it looks, a few more interesting, fantastic guests. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks, Andreas. Thanks, everybody. And tune in again next week for DX Leaders. Bye-bye.